Welcome to Freaky February. It is the podcast daily, and a new month has arrived. That is Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. And maybe, Bill, a new month is all Ohio State basketball needs because January is over. It's in the rear view, and it stunk.
That's weird. I'm not used to hearing that about Ohio State basketball. I thought for a second you forgot which day of the week it was, and then I was confused about which day of the week it was.
I got you both, suckers, because guess what? It's going to be a Freaky Friday tomorrow.
Oh, man. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if February is better for the basketball Buckeyes. Because January was stinky. Like that was. I am. I don't cover basketball like I used to, so I don't want to act like I'm an expert on what's happening with them. I'm just watching them on TV like everybody else. But I am pretty surprised by what has happened over the last month because I thought that Ohio State had endured all of last year to avoid this, and they're right back in it, which is a little shocking to me.
Yeah,
A lot of the built-in excuses that have been there for the last year and the year before when roster turnover happens, and you still have a lot of that this year. But the goal was to continue to grow into this roster a little bit and let the young guys a year ago, the freshmen, the Thorntons, the Roddy Gales, the Felix Akparas, start to develop and become the core of the team and let those guys lead. And you still see Ohio State playing guys out there like Dale Bonner and Evan McAfee, who's played well, but it's not Mahaffey. Sorry, like they've had their ups and downs. Even guys like Jamison Battle, who've been arguably the most consistent player all year, has had a pretty rough month of things in January, and they're still 3-7 in the Big Ten, and like you have a chance to right the ship, but like how often can that occur before people just jump off the ship, I guess, is the question. And you saw it on Tuesday night. If you watched the Ohio State basketball game against Illinois, the crowd was, I mean, Ohio State was up 5 points in the midway point of the first half, and you get a couple crappy fouls, and then they just fell apart. And there's just like a component missing. And as Bill said, we're not there every day. We don't really get a chance to talk to these guys as much as some other outlets have because we're focused solely on football. But it just seems like there's just something missing.
Yeah, we will get back to what this podcast talks about, which is football. And I just think it's happening, and it's also going to impact, I think, Ohio State's athletic department with the transition from Gene Smith to Ross Bjork. I think this has to be coming to a head. Everyone who has heard me talk about this before with Chris Holtmann and the basketball program and Gene Smith's decision and the contract extension 2 years ago, they already know where I stand. We don't have to devote 30 minutes to me rehashing what a mistake that was and how predictable some of this has been. But we're not going to probably talk about it again until the end of the season or until a decision is made. But I didn't want people to think, well, we're just going to ignore it entirely. I know that there are a lot of people that are Ohio State basketball fans out there that want us some answers, including you, Berm. You brought it up on Monday when we were at Roosters. So I thought we should at least touch on it a little bit. I don't know that any of us could make a case that Chris Holtmann should be retained into the future, right? I mean, is there a path forward here that I'm not aware of? Because everyone already knows where I'm at. I think that this is past due, but I also am very curious about how this is going to be managed because Gene Smith need to make this call himself. Ross Bjork going to have to be involved in the hiring process. What's the timeline look for that? Gene Smith going to entirely put this on Ross Bjork's plate as his first thing? Those are a lot of questions at once, I suppose, but somebody has to decide on a course of action because this one is not working and hasn't been working for a long time.
I don't know what they're going to do. So Doug and I talked about this on Kings of Columbus on Wednesday, like the convoluted situation with the ADs. I guess the one thing I feel very strongly about is that you can't wait until Ross Bjork officially takes over in July to make a decision about basketball. Making a coaching change late in the game is how Ohio State got into this spot in the first place by firing Thad Matta in June and hiring Chris Holtmann. And at the time, I think we're excited about that hire. Like Chris Holtmann had the beginning of his tenure was good, but clearly this is not good enough. And I don't think you do yourself any kind of service by waiting until Ross Bjork is the full-time AD to make a change. But I also don't know, I don't know, do either of you feel particularly good about the idea of Gene Smith and Ross Bjork working together to find a solution for basketball before Ross Bjork takes over full-time? Because I kind of don't.
I would say I definitely don't.
Okay.
I think you have to leave this up to the new guy, and it's unfortunate, but that's he's going to be able to start officially in July. That's what it is.
July 1. Yeah.
I'm sure he'll have input on things starting March 1st or something like that. For some reason, that date's sticking out to me like there was something about March that allowed him to start doing some.
He'll be I think like he's done at A&M in March, but he doesn't officially start here until July, but like he'll be around more in Columbus in March, starting in March.
But you look at the current state of things, and it's just we go back to 2021. Ohio State was a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament 3 years ago, and it was a program that a lot of people were looking at, with back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes that are on, and another really good class coming in now. Like, you can't blame the talent, and you can't blame the fact that you had unexpected NBA departures because guys like Malachi Branham and Bryce Sensabaugh were better than you anticipated, and then they're like, that's what happens when you're a good program. Your guys go to the NBA. That's what they're supposed to do. But when you look at the rest of the incoming talent they've had, there's no excuse for the team to just be so rudderless. And I don't know that it's a Chris Holtmann, isn't a good enough motivator. I don't know if he's not a good enough X's and O's guy. I don't know those things, but I know that something is wrong when it seems like every team they play has a much better idea of what they're doing than the Buckeyes do, who seem to constantly be freelancing everything on the court. And I just don't get it. And I've never really understood that about this offense, but it seems like they're just like, well, anytime the game gets close at the end of the first half, what do you see Ohio State offensively do, Bill?
Free ball.
It's hero ball, man.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that's accepted.
I don't know. I do wonder if there's something to the dynamics of college basketball, because like Chris Holtmann has tried the last couple of years to like thread a needle between like building with young players but supplementing them with transfers. And I do wonder if you have to be like one or the other in college basketball. Maybe you can't be both. Like in football, I think we have evidence that tells you that you can, but maybe and I'm not a college basketball expert. I mostly just watch Ohio State and then the NCAA tournament. So I don't want to pretend to be an expert on it. And maybe Ohio State is just doing something that a lot of teams do and then they're just not doing it as well. But I do feel like the transfer additions have like left a lot to be desired. Like even Jamison Battle, I know he's scoring a lot, but all like Jamison Battle throughout his entire career has been a guy who scores a lot on teams that lose a lot. So like I don't know that any of that is tremendously impactful for Ohio State right now. And maybe a couple of years ago, the decision should have just been made to like only go with guys that you recruit and develop and not bring in transfers. I'm not sure, but the dynamics seem to be thrown off a bit from, again, what I've observed from a distance.
There's not been the elevation of the game that we expected to see from a year ago to now for guys like Roddy Gale. That we have not seen it in the leadership of the team. And the one guy this year who's been a breath of fresh air, I think, is Felix Akpara, who's taken a major step up. Yeah. But because you play in the Big Ten where your big guys are allowed to beat the crap out of Ohio State's big guys all the time, like we see anytime you play Illinois or Purdue or Michigan State, guys are allowed to just do whatever they want. I mean, everything changed in Tuesday night's game against Illinois when Akpara got called for a terrible second foul with about 8 minutes to go in the first half, and the Buckeyes just lost their inside guy, and then Illinois, who's the best rebounding team in the league, just decimated them because no one else on Ohio State could get a rebound. The Buckeyes continue to be way too small. They continue to be way too freelancy on offense, and they continue to play defense from 4 steps away from outside shooters. And those are things that are effort, I think, in a lot of cases, and coaching. And so I think you have to look at Holtmann and say, how does this change? And if the last 3 Januaries are not enough to give you an indicator of that things need to change, well, then that sort of myopic approach is pretty damning, I think, and it speaks about what ultimately probably has to happen for this basketball program.
Well, for the health of the program, if you become a subject of mockery, and if people show up to your games and show on social media and take screenshots of the entire upper bowl being empty at the Schottenstein Center, that's the apathy that we've talked about for 2 years. And Ohio State basketball is never going to have the day in, day out, 365 support of Ohio State football. We know that. Again, it comes back to the conversation that we had with the contract extension. Well, if this is what is an acceptable amount of results to maintain and and keep the same coaching staff, at some point, everyone is going to tune out. That small segment that is fully entrenched and ingrained and invested in Ohio State basketball, you're not giving them any reason to come to a Tuesday night Big Ten game against a ranked opponent. I, maybe it doesn't have to be sold out, but it shouldn't be completely empty in half of the building. And again, it's what is Ohio State willing to accept? Like, what is the standard of success for them? I personally just don't think, and I haven't for a while, that that's good enough. So I'm a broken record on that point. We don't have to belabor it, but I feel like the only reason that we're bringing it up right now in this episode is like that's a part that I think the Ohio State administration will look at and be like, now we've gone too far. We cannot sustain this program if people aren't even going to come to this game or be invested at all in watching it. And that's where I think they're at.
Let's put some money into renovating St. John Arena, turning that into the basketball arena, using the Shot Center for multi-purpose venue, concerts, etc. Use it for NCAA tournament games. But like, let's be clear about what you've done to this program in the last 15, 20 years by putting them in this arena that they're never going to sell out. That's just not the way it works. So let's put them in an arena that's actually a good basketball arena. Let's cut the attendance down to 11,000 instead of trying to pretend you're going to ever get 19,000 in there. And realize that Ohio State, as Bill and Doug talked about all last week on one of the episodes of Kings of Columbus, football is king. Let's stop pretending that basketball can't be like a good prince, though, okay? Because it can be a good prince at Ohio State. It is a proud basketball tradition in Columbus. And watching what's happened in these last few years, and the word you use is right, the apathy is the problem. It is hard to sit down and watch the game and be excited to watch it. Like, there's just nothing that you see on the field, on the court, that you're like, oh yeah, this is what I'm excited about. It's just energyless and sad.
It can be profitable to watch, though. I think there are ways to squeeze out some enjoyment of that for sure. All right, let's get back to business then.
Can I drop one thing before we do that?
Absolutely, you can. Sorry, Bill.
The women's team is really good. Like, go watch them.
They hustle their hearts out, man.
Yeah, they're really good. They don't get talked about enough.
They play crazy high energy basketball. They sell out, not the arena, but they sell out on every single play. And I just don't see the men doing that. And that's ultimately the difference. I don't watch them and think, wow, those guys are going as hard as they possibly can. And I watch every other team in the league, and it seems like they are. And I don't know if that's because I have just these blinders on, that I have super high expectations for Ohio State. Maybe they shouldn't, but I watch Rutgers play, and they're going hard as they possibly can. I watch Nebraska, and they're going as hard as they possibly can. Ohio State should be better than Rutgers and Nebraska and Northwestern. You can't be down 35 points at Northwestern. You can't. I mean, sorry.
I think that's a fair point that you both make. Like, I have never tried to put Ohio State football standards on Ohio State basketball. I know that they are separate conversations, and I'm not expecting Ohio State basketball to ever contend for a national championship every year. So if you want a more apples to apples comparison, what Kevin McGuff and the women's basketball team have built right now matches exactly what I think should happen. They have a consistent fan base that's invested in what's going on because they know they can make a Sweet 16 run. There's gonna be exciting stuff in basketball. They've won some games that really count. They have enough energy to go out on the court and stand up for their team and knock Caitlin Clark to the ground. Like, go out there and make something happen. I'm joking about the last part, but you compete for Big Ten championships. You may not win them every year. Once in a while, you're going to. You can get into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament and let people, get to know your roster and your personalities at the time where people are really paying attention at the most. Like, they did that, have done that, had an opportunity maybe to do even more last year, but because they didn't cut down the nets or get to the Final Four every single year doesn't mean that can't be a fair measure of success. Women's basketball and men's basketball should be doing about the same thing. One of them, I think, is meeting the standard, and the other hasn't even been close.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. Women play Wisconsin tonight. They got a banger on Sunday against Indiana. Two teams that are 8-1 in the Big Ten. Go watch that game. It's here in Columbus.
That's some advice for the weekend.
The men travel to Iowa. They haven't won a road game in the Big Ten in over a year.
Yeah, and they're terrible defensively, which is a great recipe when you're going to play Iowa.
Well,
So
find
something else to do
find
with-
your local gambling app and invest in Ohio State basketball. That's all I'll say. You can do whatever you want with that information, but that's what I'll be doing. What will the
February
football
1st.
team? Yeah, what will the football team be doing, Berm? What's on your mind about? You said there was some stuff that you wanted to talk about in recruiting wise. What is it?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's interesting. Here we are. It's February 1st now. The Ohio State is still short a full-time assistant coach. January 31st was, to our knowledge, the final day of the contract of Corey Dennis in his role as a full-time assistant for Ohio State. And so now the question is, what are you doing? And now, like I was preaching patience throughout December and January, but here we are now. The off season is in the midst of full off seasoning. You're
Mhm.
getting ready to start spring practice in a couple weeks. Like I think it'd be a good time to make a decision as to if you're promoting James Laurinaitis or if you're not. And if you're not, I think that people are going to want a pretty good explanation for why you're not, if the choice is instead to hire another full-time special team coordinator or something of that ilk, because that makes, to me, zero sense. And I've talked to a lot of recruits in the last month about James Laurinaitis on the road. Linebackers across this country are absolutely enamored by him when he comes into their schools and when he what he's done in his career, what he's telling them he can do with them. And it seems to me there was an order of things that made sense for this extra spot for Ohio State. And I think we all agreed that if you could find a full-time defensive ends coach / second defensive line coach to work alongside Larry Johnson to begin a transition phase, whether it's next year or 2 years, whenever it is, that may make sense. But the only thing that was close to that was just promoting James Laurinaitis and letting the rest sort itself out, because you have a number of part-time staffers and full-time staffers who can team up and handle special teams. So here we are on February 1st, and that hasn't happened. What do you guys think is the reason for that, and where do you think it's going to go?
I only saw two paths forward with this final spot, Berm, and that was what you mentioned. You take a mighty swing at somebody like Jason Taylor and prepare for the future on the defensive line. And if you can't, the other option wasn't just like an also ran. It was making James Laurinaitis full time, removing the possibility, which other schools are using, not just ones that are trying to hire him, but as you know well, negatively recruit against James Laurinaitis. Like, wow, you're going to go? This guy's only a GA, even if he's the best possible GA that you could have in the country or at that position. You could cut that argument out of the equation. You put him on the road, and you move forward with some of that balance on the defensive staff. Really did not consider dating back to November 27th, 28th, December 1st, when we started having these conversations more pointedly, that there would be a third option for that, which would be considering a special teams coordinator and making them full time. That seemed pointless to me, unnecessary, problematic based on what happened. I don't. Other programs are not using that spot for that purpose, and I think there's good reason for that in college football for a lot of the points that you raised, with whether that's Keenan Bailey or an army of GAs and quality control people. You can address special teams without a full-time position. And then about a week and a half ago, I received a couple of messages like, have you heard that this guy that he's interviewed at Tennessee, and he also they're worried he's going up to Columbus to interview for the full-time special teams role. And I said, what special teams role? That's not a full-time position. And I thought that things were trending towards the James Laurinaitis promotion about a week and a half ago. So when you ask me, Berm, what's happening? I don't know. Strong consideration, some level of I guess I can't say strong, but some level of consideration for a special teams coordinator. And that just seems crazy to me. If you wind up with option 3 when option 2 is still very much on the table for you, and there's no reason for it not to be.
We think we'll know by. We're assuming next Wednesday we're going to talk to Ryan Day because it's signing day. Like there'll be resolution one way or the other.
Talk to Bill O'Brien. We'll probably talk to McArary, I would imagine, and then whoever this next guy is. Right? You'd think.
I don't think the coaches are going to talk next week.
But we're gonna talk to Ryan Day, right? You don't think we're gonna talk to Ryan Day?
Probably Ryan Day. I don't think that the rest of the staff.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to like put a timeline on this because I think it has dragged on longer than necessary. I don't know any more than you guys what they're going to do. All I know is that I might scream if it's a special teams coordinator who doesn't coach defense because it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy if that's what they do. You're just like you're hamstringing yourself unnecessarily, and it's not like special teams are incredibly important. You want to make sure you have somebody good coaching those units. I'm not saying ignore them entirely, but a lot of programs find a way to have a coach provide more than that in terms of quality to the staff. And Ohio State is still unbalanced and if they put themselves in a position where James Laurinaitis can't go out on the road, like I don't know what we're doing here. Like the whole point of this is to give yourself more recruiting firepower on the defensive side of the ball. And you have the obvious answer to that, I think, currently on your staff. As you said, Austin, if it was a defensive line coach, I would have been fine with that too. I guess it doesn't make much sense for that person to coach any other position on defense at the moment with the way they're currently constructed. Like bringing in a special teams coordinator who helps coach defensive backs would feel a bit unnecessary. But however it shakes out, like it needs. You can tell me if I'm crazy, but like I just think they're doing themselves an incredible disservice by not balancing out their recruiting power on both sides of the ball and having people who can go on the road and talk to people like James Laurinaitis is doing right now and seemingly making a big impact while doing so.
Yeah, and I agree. The impact that he's made on recruits is substantial, and it is in that Heartline Walton-esque vibe that he gives out to people. And it does, at least there is an interesting subplot right now that Ohio State does not have a punter. And it needs to find someone that's going to coach that position and someone that's going to recruit a punter. But you're Ohio State, so
What
like,
about Joe McGuire, the kid from
Yeah.
Australia?
They brought in a punter
I
already.
mean, clearly, sure, that's a preferred walk on. I mean, but I think that they have interest in finding another punter who's more established. But again, heading into 2024, like if you're looking down the list of things Ohio State needs to win the national championship, like punter is not on that list. So, if you want to,
Disagree.
you shouldn't have to punt next year if you're Ohio State with the pieces they have. So, I think that it does. But again, there's nothing that stops the current staff from recruiting that position. You just aren't going to coach it. And
They
honestly,
don't coach it anyway. They're not kicking specialists.
yeah, exactly. Most of these guys are not. It's not like Parker Fleming was a punter, so I don't think it really ultimately matters. These punters are like, can you drop the ball on your foot and hit it? Yes, cool. I coached you. Like that's it. Like I just don't understand the delay, the holdup, and at this point, I think what you run the risk of is providing some like alienation of if you're asking James Laurinaitis in 2 weeks to be like, hey, by the way, can you just come back for another year? And like the things that he's seemingly been willing to do over the last month if necessary, I think go out the window if you make what would be described as like a luxury hire or and that's what I would consider like another special teams coordinator. Like it's not necessary. The defensive line thing we've talked about for the last month, that would make sense. And I think it's easily explainable to James Laurinaitis, who does have other programs around the country trying to poach him or NFL teams trying to poach him. Like to me, it just seems like you're putting yourself in a really bizarre spot that doesn't need to be in. And Ryan Day has done a lot of really great things this offseason and struck the right notes in pretty much every single song he's tried to play. But here's like the final song, and it seems like the easiest one to play, and yet people are just ding, dang, 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 dang on the keyboard for no reason.
I love your metaphors. They're great.
I want that cut up into a GIF, please. It's just I think in order of preference, I would have said go after Jason Taylor, and then if that doesn't work out, and there's no one else that you think is a surefire Ohio State replacement for Larry Johnson in the future, then James Laurinaitis locking him up is the move, and there is no option 3. And that's how I feel. I think most Ohio State fans probably agree with me. They may not, but that's okay. That's how I feel. And I know that there are people in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center who also see it that way and feel like you can't, at this point, take the risk of losing James Laurinaitis to the NFL or to someone who would triple his pay and make him a full-time coach at the college level. I don't if you're telling James Laurinaitis at this point, we got an NFL Hall of Famer, he's coming in and he's going to help ease into a year into advance without Larry Johnson and then you'll be full time. I think James would say, yes, absolutely. That's the best thing for my alma mater. I understand. I'll make those sacrifices. If you're taking a chance on a non-sure thing at the defensive line, that's a little bit tougher sell. He may still be willing to do that. If you decide to not promote him in favor of a special teams coordinator, I think you're going to take an unnecessary risk by slapping in the face a program legend. And that may not be the intent. What, Weber? I'm sorry.
Slap it a fast.
Slap it a fast, man. It may not be intended that way. And it may come with like really great intentions and this person can bring this element. I think that's going to be hard. I just wouldn't, at this point, I wouldn't take that gamble. I don't really think that James is one, but that's, I think, what I'm having such a hard time with it. It's like, it just seems like such a no-brainer.
Yeah. And it may all be for naught. It may all be a moot point because it's likely that will still be the decision, I think, for Ohio State. But like the delay is interesting, is it not, Bill?
It is interesting. I have another question for the two of you while we're talking staff stuff. There was a thought, at least, that if and when Ryan Day hired an offensive coordinator, that maybe something could change with the rest of the offensive staff. Seems unlikely now that it's February 1st and nothing has happened, that any changes will happen there. So can we close the book on that notion as Ohio State moves further into the offseason?
That appears to be the case based on my understanding. Got these guys Justin Fry, for example, continue to be out there on the road. Berm can actually dive into that. I think that's something he wanted to talk about with this last weekend before the signing period. Brian Hartline's
I think it's an important thing. I think what Ohio State and what Ryan Day are hoping for is that everyone sort of buys into this notion that everything is now a 1-year job, right? From here until next November or next December, and just go as hard as you can. Let's win out and then let people decide what they want to do from there. I think you may see some more even if Ryan Day was to do everything that the Buckeyes are trying to do and win a national championship, I think you might see a number of changes next year. I don't think that they're going to do that at this point because it's all of the work that was done into bringing back so many guys from last year's team and keeping the roster intact, adding guys like Quinshawn Judkins, adding guys like obviously Caleb Downs, Julian Sayin. I think any more that you risk just upsetting the apple cart right now isn't worth the long-term potential, loss of chemistry. I think that's the most important thing right now. So I think they're going to stand pat.
Where are the coaches going this weekend, Berm?
I don't know. Everywhere.
Cool.
Good. They're going.
I just wanted to check that box because you said you wanted to talk about it.
Fascinating is how, because now you're allowed to actually talk to players when you go on visits, and it's not just like the bump in rule that you used to have. So it'd be you'd have all 11 coaches by themselves, and like you'd be like, oh, I just bumped into this kid in the hallway and said, what's up? And then walked by, and like you're not actually allowed to like sit down and have meetings with kids in their schools, talk to people. So Ohio State has adjusted their recruiting approach this year, and people probably noticed it as you see pictures on Twitter and social media, how there's like 4 coaches traveling together in basically little pods, which is a really interesting approach, and it seems to be paying off when you're putting a much bigger like emphasis on every player that you meet when you send Ryan Day and James Laurinaitis and Jim Knowles and Tim Walton into the building at the same time instead of just Jim Knowles. So it is an interesting approach change that they've had this offseason. And then you couple that with the fact that they had a big junior day on the January 20th weekend. Like that's something they haven't done for the last 4 years because they just don't like the idea of asking people to travel in January because you never know how things go weather-wise. So they're being more aggressive, but it's also it's interesting to see a little bit of the sea change as far as how they're going about it because the rules are changing a little bit. So it's paying off though.
Well, I would listen to another podcast about that, or I would read about it at ohiostate.rivals.com, or I would get some texts into my phone about it at 614-662-4509 for a 14-day free trial. Cancel at any point after that. I think it's all good stuff. I'd like to hear more about it instead of just saving it for the end of the podcast daily. So I'm going to put a pin in it for now. We're going to come back to it later on. Happy February, everybody. The greatest month on the calendar. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.